Right, hey everybody. So yeah, it's been a while that I've done any videos, but I thought this might be sort of fun thing. So the reason I haven't been doing a lot of videos is like I've mostly been focusing on learning new stuff myself in my free time. I've been learning Unreal Engine and I'm making a game, which has been interesting. And I am planning to do some sort of like a devlog thing now that I've come closer to actually implementing some stuff in there that actually works. But for today, I thought it might be fun to do a video about this thing. So I just did a sort of so this was essentially just a daily render. So I made a daily still render because so my girlfriend is gonna so we're gonna go to a thing soon where she was gonna sell some prints of her work, and I was gonna go with her. And I figured, well, if I'm gonna go there anyway, I might as well also maybe put some of my own prints on. So I've decided to also maybe do 1 or 2 prints of my own. So I figured I would make something for getting it printed and just putting it there. And then I thought it would be cool to do like a QR code on the background, and then people could scan it and they could go to the animation. So it's essentially, this was just a daily render thing that I made. And I thought it looked pretty cool. It's quite a simple scene, but I thought it might be fun to do a little video about how I made it. You can download the source files as all of my projects. You can download the source files on my Patreon. So yeah, let's just dive into sort of how I made this. So we're gonna jump back and forth between sort of the composite here and the render. Actually, fun fact is that you can see the render here looks quite different from the composite. Actually, it was meant to look a lot more like the composite, but I was stupid enough. Like, I had an HDRI in here in the light dome. However, I accidentally used $hip in there, and then I submitted it to deadline with submit Houdini. And I always tell people not to do that, and then I go and do it myself. So how it should have looked in the render was like this. As you can see, it's already like a lot closer to what I ended up just faking in the composite. But I didn't want to re-render because it's quite a slow render because of the depth of field and the sort of the random walk subsurface scattering that's going on. Yeah, essentially this is what you would need. This would then need to be $job. Yeah, let's just walk through the scene. It's quite a simple scene, but I think maybe it might still be interesting for some people to see how this was done essentially. So you can see here we have a tendril folder, which has all of the tendrils. You can see it's essentially a couple of patches. I could have just made more tendrils altogether, but I made the one patch look nice, and I just decided to sort of instance those in the scene. So essentially you just have the one patch here. We'll go into this in a little bit. And then you just put in the instance, you put it in fast point instancing, and then you can just place it somewhere in your scene. It will just instance whatever it is here with all of these settings. So let's just dive in there. So we start off with a grid. Turn off my light here. So start off with a grid, adding a little bit of detail there with a mountain top, and then scattering some points on it. You can see I'm doing 2 different scatters. So just relax iterations here, and then with a sort of a lot more points, and also still with relax iterations, so we get sort of a nice sort of uniformly spaced thing. Then we're randomizing the p-scale here. The left ones here are a little bit bigger than the right ones. Those are a little bit smaller. Then we copy sort of these lines to it. And we do the same over here on the right. So you can see we get sort of the bottom patch to fill it in, and the top patch, which are the sort of the larger ones. So this is essentially the larger ones, and then you have the bottom ones on the bottom there, which look quite nice. And there's actually no simulation here. It's similar to, like, I like working with noises quite a lot. I like to do a lot of the subs, and so essentially what it is here is I have a VOP. Let me just move this over to the side a little bit. So I'm just grabbing a curl noise and grabbing the position, adding the curl noise to the position. So we just get some noise there, and I have a curve U in here. So on the line here, I'm putting a resample to add some more points. You can see here, you can add some more points with resample. And I output a curve U attribute. The curve U attribute, if you watched Houdini 101, you know all about this, because this is essentially, well, I do this a lot anyway. But so you get an attribute across your curve from 0 to 1. So 0 to 1 or 0 to 1, I don't know how it is doing it on this one particularly, but you can use that in a ramp. So you can bind it in, put it in a ramp, and then you can get some control over sort of where you want the noise to appear. So you can see now I can sort of not have it appear in the bottom, because of course it needs to be stuck to the bottom part, right? So because if I just had it like this, it would sort of move everywhere, which you don't necessarily want. So you just put it in there, you multiply your amplitude by that ramp noise, and you put it in the add here, and then you just put it in position, and you get this sort of this nice wavy pattern. And then in the offset, you can just animate it. You can animate it with a curve, or you could put something like $T in there, and it would also animate. I did it with a curve, but doesn't necessarily matter how you do it. Just animate it. But you can see if you just play through it, you can see sort of a nice wavy pattern. And then I'm smoothing those out a little bit. I could have maybe added a little bit more points to each of one of those, but I didn't want my final curves to end up with too much geometry either. So I decided to not have that much going on there, because this is already on the right here, so 130,000 points. This is not too much. So there's multiple ways you can render this. You can see here this with the bottom patch as well. So you can see you get this nice sort of wavy pattern going on. Looks quite nice also from the top. Multiple ways to render this. You could sweep those and just actually create geometry. So if you put sweep here, put it to a round tube, you can get some round tubes. You can put it to end caps to grid, and you will get sort of this top part, and you get sort of these things. And you could, if you were to do that on sort of the entire thing, you could see we get some stuff there, which is quite nice, but it's gets a little bit heavy, 1.3 million points. You could, of course, turn this down and would be a little bit less heavy. So I didn't end up rendering it like that. I ended up rendering it as Redshift curves, because this was rendered in Redshift. So you can just go to your Redshift, to your geometry node, Redshift tab, strands, and you can turn render object as strands, and it's essentially just gonna give you the same result as you can see here in the render, also with sort of the top part. So you have the default scale and global scale multiplier. Essentially, this will also pick up on p-scale. You can see you can also ignore p-scale if you want. So that's why we have p-scale here as well to sort of control the thickness. So 1 and 0.5. So this is going to be half as thick. And then Redshift will just generate these shapes on demand. I have tessellation quite low because I didn't want it to be too memory hungry. Strands in Redshift are not super efficient. They're quite slow, actually. But this did give me a little bit better result than just sweeping it and instancing it like that. Because now I think it could still use the screen space adaptive, even if it's instance. I'm not completely sure. But I think that should work. If it doesn't, then it didn't. So yeah, let's continue. So I also have some particles going on here. It's quite a simple thing. So you just have these, let's just have a look at them in the composites. You can actually see what they're doing. So here we have this, all right. Doesn't seem to really want to. All right, there we go. So you can see it's just essentially just sort of floaty particles, which always just looks quite nice. And some weird thing popping in there. I think that probably was still in memory. So essentially what we're doing here is to just have a box made of VDB from it, scattering some points in it, global seed $T, so you can see it changes. It's going to change every frame. Then in the pop network, not doing anything too interesting, just have two noises here, just sort of move these about. So you can see it's just, and these pop forces also use curl noise, if I'm correct. So it's similar to the noise we were using before. You can see here, if you can dive into it, you can see it actually uses a curl noise. So if you didn't know, pop forces are based on curl noise. So you get sort of a nice look with the one bigger noise and the one slightly smaller noise. So we're just caching that out. And we're time blending it to make it a little bit slower. Make sure that you use point ID for that, so else it's going to pop in and out. Setting some p-scales here. again, seed attribute on ID. Also you're going to get jittering. I can show you what that looks like if you want. You can just let's put a sphere on it. I should turn on pack. Okay, this might crash because I forgot to turn on. All right, back in instance. All right, so now this looks fine. If I were to turn off seed ID, you can see it's gonna change the scale every frame. So every point has a unique ID. So if you turn this on, it will sort of do the randomized P scale by the ID, which is unique. If you don't do it, it's going to do it by the point number. But of course, we're sourcing points every frame, so the point number is going to change. What I did here is kind of redundant. So, all right, so I'm actually I'm copying. Let's look through the camera. I'm actually copying disks to it, which I put a texture on it of like a little smoke puff. So essentially, what I have here is I've loaded in the point from the camera. You cannot really see, but like there's inside of a camera. If you go inside of a camera, you can see it's even pointing to the wrong camera. Like it was a very quick sort of fun project. Like I mentioned, I did this in a couple of hours. So there's a couple of weird things all over the place. So it's not, let me just actually grab the correct one. So it's actually correct for the tutorial file. There we go. So essentially what I'm doing here is I'm just looking through the camera now. I'm grabbing the position of the point inside the camera, and then I am writing out a normal, which is essentially just normalizing sort of so I'm subtracting the camera position to the current position, and you essentially get a, let's see if this actually wants to visualize. It's normal visualization. Oh, you can see it here. So it sort of points towards the camera or away from it. Right now, I'm not sure. You can invert it if you want. And then what you would get is, if I increase the scale, you would essentially just get these things that are sort of always facing the camera, essentially. I kind of undone that by just enabling orient, which kind of I'm randomizing that, so you could disable this and it doesn't necessarily do anything, because I rendered it like that. It just looked a little bit too uniform, so I essentially just got rid of it, and then I'm doing it with the with this and just biasing it toward the direction. It just ended up looking nicer like this if it wasn't completely facing the camera. So you can see if you get close, you can actually see them sort of move like that. I'm not even sure if the smoke puff was actually correctly applied here, because you can actually see the angle. Again, it was just very quick, sort of. It just looked nice, and then I rendered it. Yeah, I'm just offsetting the time here, so it actually starts sort of a little bit into it. And then here, calculating a float, so from age, so based on the age between 0 and life. So life is essentially when the age meets life, it's gonna kill off the particle in the solver. So if you fit age between 0 and life, you can fit it to get a 0 to 1 attribute, and you can use that with a ramp to do some alpha ramping. So you can sort of, you don't see it because there's stuff copied to it, but essentially you can fade in and out these particles. So you just get these particles there. So that's essentially everything for the geometry stuff. Let's talk a little bit about some of the materials. So let's go into Redshift material, Tendrils. So it's a very basic material. I also experimented with some noises, but I kind of liked the just a sort of uniform look. It kind of, when I started adding some displacement or noises, it kind of didn't look as nice. The material itself is quite basic, so nothing with base color, just a uniform gray, just standard, just reflective, a little bit of roughness, a little bit of transmission, so we actually get some refraction through this. Aside from that, I didn't really do much with it, but a lot of the color comes from the subsurface, so I actually have random walk subsurface scattering right now, which is actually quite new. It got introduced like a couple of builds ago in Redshift. So first you had point-based and ray trace diffusion. Random walk is sort of an algorithm to get much nicer looking and much more accurate subsurface scattering. It's not necessarily the fastest, but it does look quite nice. So point-based is essentially where it just scatters points inside your curves and then just blurs those out to sort of fake the caustics. Ray traced was sort of another algorithm to actually ray trace the caustics. And random walk, you should just Google what it is. If you just Google and find some articles about what random walk is, you'll probably get a much better explanation than I will give you right now. But the random walk is also the default now because it's a more modern way of doing subsurface scattering. It looks nice. So yeah, that's just the material. Apart from that, there's not really a lot going on here. It's a very basic material. Particles. Essentially, the particles just loading in the alpha attribute that we created over here. So we can sort of fade out the opacity. So I'm just popping out the opacity here and then multiplying it by the alpha. So we still have some control here in this material, sort of with the alpha color, and then we're just multiplying it here so we can fade it out. I put a sprite here, putting as a text buff. This should work, but again, it didn't work because I used $hip again. Like I should, like always when I just do bigger projects and I use my $root setup and with the $hip it works, but over here I guess I messed it up with using $hip, and it's because I was just rendering. I started this in 19.5 and it didn't have deadline working for 19.5, so I figured, all right, I'm gonna render everything locally, so it doesn't matter if I use $hip, and I ended up using deadline anyway, because I also wanted to use, because the render times were a little bit slow, so I wanted to use my other machine to render as well. So I ended up still using deadline, and then this messed that up. So that's why this doesn't have the smoke buff applied. But again, they're very small, so you don't necessarily see it. It still looks nice. So yeah, I mean, lots of mistakes here. But again, this was just a daily render, so it doesn't really matter in this case. There's a caustic pattern here. This is essentially the pattern here on the bottom, which is applied to a grid here on top, which is this thing. It's mainly for the volumetrics. I can show you what the thing looks like. Let's go to out. Let's turn on. Let's switch the camera. Let me move this a little bit closer. No, I don't want to make an L system. All right, let's place render. And I had emission. Wait, so this should be off by default. I had it turned on for the for previous take that I did. So as you can see here, just using the caustics thing there, and essentially what I'm using it for. And again, I think something here went wrong is also with the final render, how I used this with the volumetrics. But let's just walk through this. So in the render view, there's a different pass here for volumetrics. And I think I should have used this thing. Yeah, right. So I think that because of the diffusion, you don't really see that much, to be honest. Maybe if So I put it there to get a little bit more of a God ray look, which I guess didn't really end up doing that much. But essentially, if you just put something like there to sort of block your light, you can sort of use it to get a little bit more control over, to get like some nice gold rays. You can see here it's not necessarily doing that much, but for the volume. So I rendered those separately, as you can see here. Let me just put this back to what it was before. But I am rendering this sort of so I'm essentially matting out all of the objects. I have a null here, this controls the matte. And then you have here in your, I render this without any post. So it should be like that. And you just have your volume scatter here, which you can sort of control a lot of the stuff. So if you, and it's not necessarily being the fastest right now. Maybe it's because I'm recording. So you can see you can control your scattering there. And this is probably just better to render separately because you can still have some controls to work with this in compositing, which I have here. So you can see here's my volume render. You can see I'm still doing some grade on it. And now it's getting really slow because it's still doing function. All right, let me just turn off the IPR here. I'm not sure why I think it's because I'm recording it. It's acting up right now. You can see here, so you can still have some control over what you want to do with your volumetrics. So you can see I can still sort of fade them in composite. So that's kind of a thing that I like to do, even with simple sort of daily renders like this. It's just nicer to have those controls and having to re-render the entire scene and decide, all right, I want a little bit less intense volumetrics. So yeah, that's how that's set up. Quite simple. Particles, not too difficult either. So you can see now I am actually getting the smoke puff. So this is what it was supposed to look like. But I mean, it still looks decent. I might actually, before I upload this tutorial, I might just because this was pretty fast. Maybe I'll just re-render it and then just actually comp it in. So maybe the final thing will actually have the smoke puff. Who knows? But yeah, you can see this looks quite nice, and you get sort of the from the light here, you get sort of the color. For particles like this, if you're gonna also do the, I rendered the depth of field into this as well. I did that everywhere, just a lot of max samples. Like I tried doing the depth of field in compositing, it just ended up looking better by rendering it in the into the render. Well, essentially, like with this stuff, it really depends on what you're doing. For this stuff, because it was just a personal project, daily render does I didn't necessarily care too much for keeping the control. Normally on a client project, you would want to keep depth of field in compositing as much as you can, because so if you didn't know, you probably do, but you can do depth of field in compositing actually. Essentially, you will, if you have that, you can just pick and choose your focal plane in compositing. And of course, if you have a client project, it's going to be easier if the client decides to want a little bit more, depth of field a little bit less. It's just better to have controls there. Anyway, with the particles, make sure that you do a lot of samples because they're small. So if you don't do that, they're not going to pick up. So if I'm going to do something like this, it's not going to sample properly. Usually not too bad here. As you can see, it's still it's really fast. So even if I crank up the samples, it's still relatively fast. You get just a little bit crisper. I guess here in this case, you can see it's a little bit nicer. So it doesn't necessarily matter that much here, but generally you want to sample your particles quite high, especially if you want to get some passes from it. Because you can see here, if you have a very low sort of pass here, your passes are gonna look terrible, which would look better if you just do more samples. Aside from that, there's just the glow light here. Essentially, this moves up. Nothing too interesting there. I did a little bit of a flicker. I did that in compositing. Aside from that, nothing too interesting. Make sure you have controls here over volume, so make sure that's on, and however hard you want it. Essentially, here I had the light with the God rays. Essentially, like I mentioned, the God rays are not super visible in the volume render. Yeah, that's it for the and for the focus. What I do is you can put this script v-length v to origin from the origin of the camera essentially to the focus target, which is this one. So this is essentially where the focus for the render would be, which is essentially the center. And then put focus target, and then it will focus on that specific part of the image. Still don't necessarily know why Houdini doesn't just have a thing that you can drag in and it will do that by default. It would be nice to have something for that, but this works. Just and I like I like a lot of times where I just mistype this and it doesn't work, and I just put the thing I typed in Google and then it'll come up with the correct thing. I'm not sure, like I keep messing that up all the time, but like it works. So yeah, that's the Houdini part. Let's quickly run through the composite as well. So essentially this is how we start out. Do a little bit of color correction here, nothing like just brightening it up. You can see I have the post effects rendered into here. If you want to separate your post effect from the image and have it as AOV, I didn't have that here. But what you would do is you would add another AOV, put this to beauty. Then you would get, this would be a beauty without post effects. And then you could essentially subtract the beauty with post effects from the other one, and then you would essentially, or the one, yeah, so the post effects and subtract the regular one from it, and you would get a post effects AOV. Or you could rebuild your entire scene here with your AOVs, and you could do the same, which will not always work. Because like I rendered this with denoising in the denoiser, because the Altus denoiser was giving me quite nice results. Let me see where I always forget where that is being turned on in Redshift, because I don't necessarily use it that much. All right, Houdini suddenly crashed out of nowhere. Anyway, let me have a look at where this thing is located again. All right, there we go. So it's under the Redshift. Oh, by the way, I always use advanced settings for my, I don't like the basic, because the auto sampling is just generally a lot slower than anything I can just put myself. So I use Altus single pass. It gave quite a nice denoised result. So, because especially in this subsurface gathering, I had like quite a lot of sort of fireflies and just overall not looking great. And Altus essentially cleaned that up better than doing it myself in compositing. So that's why I just ended up using that. So yeah, it's already the render is already sort of quite noise free. Looks quite nice. You can see there's a little bit of denoising artifacting here, but because it's sort of a underwater alien type thing, I guess. So it's not necessarily annoying. You can see a little bit of jittering here. Just because of the smoothing. I should have maybe used a little bit more points on my curves in retrospect, but whatever. So brightening it up a little bit here. Then here I'm using the C depth pass. Let's see, to grade a little bit. As you can see, then I have a little bit more control here over. I'm not sure if I'm doing that much with it that much. So in this case, I don't think it does that much, but what you can do here is you have, let's see, let's turn off the contrast. Yeah, right. So what you could sort of, let me just, so that's where you can use the Z-Dep. I ended up doing a little bit different here, but you can sort of use this to grade. Oh, it's not even set to luminance. All right, you can see I'm just messing up here. So you can use this to essentially brighten certain areas, because you have. So now with this, for example, I could specifically grade the bottom, like the back part. So that's essentially what you would use something like that for. Because this is set to alpha, it's not necessarily doing a lot. What I am using here is, okay, I didn't use that in this comp. I had a previous comp where I was using the position pass as well to do something like that, which was quite interesting. Maybe I can show how that works. I mean, if I'm making this video anyway. So what you would do is you would, let's see, does this have the position pass? All right, so what you would do is you would grab your render, you would grab grab another one. Let's go to, and this also works in Nuke, by the way, but I'm using Fusion for now. So you put, you go into channels here. Wait, where am I? All right, yeah, you go into channels, you put position, where is it? Position R, position G, position B. So this is a position path. It might look like gibberish, but essentially this holds the coordinates of everything. Again, like position is just a vector, and you can display a vector as color. So you would then go in this thing, you would do channel booleans, you would plug it in there, you would just copy and then put RGB to do nothing, also alpha to do nothing. So essentially doesn't look like anything changed, but we now got a, we should have, oh, not yet. We should go to auxiliary inputs, enable extra channels, and then go to position. Next position, put it to red foreground, Y position green, foreground green, and then blue foreground. And now we should have a position channel over here. And then we could do a volume mask. And essentially this allows you to pick there, and let's put it to mask only. Or mask only. Essentially this allows you now to do sort of a mask from a position in space. So let's fade it out a little bit more. Maybe in this case it would make more sense to, let's try it like this. All right, let's do a little bit soft edge. And you could say we're at color correct. And you could set to luminance, put it to luminance, or you could put it to alpha, do whatever you want. And you can see now I can actually have control over this specific region there. You can see you can do quite a lot in compositing, which you still think, I think a lot of 3D only artists like really miss this. Like these are really good skills to have. So if you didn't know that, like that's really, like that's why I like to finish my image in compositing generally. I'll leave this in as well here for the download. So essentially merging in the volumes there. Taking the color out a little bit. I guess bringing the color in a little bit over there. Doing a little bit of a glow thing here, which for some reason not necessarily showing me a lot here. It's weird. I mean, it's there, but I just have it very mild. Color correcting a little bit up again, I guess. And, well, essentially, then we're through the composite. I did a little bit of stuff in After Effects as well. Let me just open that as well. Right, so I actually decided to just re-render the particles. So here they are with the puff. I mean, it was a fast render anyway, so not a big difference, but there is some difference, I guess. Let's, I mean, doesn't necessarily matter. All right, so I also did some stuff in After Effects. Like, I know I should just stop using After Effects, but just for some stuff, I just like it. So, for example, like I have these nested in Premiere now with some audio on it. Like for stuff like that, I just like it. I just wish the ACES support would be better. But like I've just baked this to sRGB for the final things. So here I'm just doing the crops. So the Instagram post, story, and the 16:9. So I'm doing a little bit of the sort of the exposure flicker here, which is essentially just a exposure with not that one. master exposure. So just a wiggle expression in there. So pretty basic. And then I'm adding a little bit of grain. Might actually reduce that a little bit. I'm just still need to do the final export for this anyway. So might as well reduce it a little bit while I'm at here, right? So yeah, that's essentially the whole thing. Oh, did I copy the wrong one? I did. Let's put it in here. All right. All right, there we go. So yeah, that's it. Just a small project. I do hope that you learned some stuff from this. Right, so that was pretty much the entire thing. So even though it's a simple setup, I just thought it would be interesting to do this as a just a tutorial, so you can just sort of see how something like this is built. Again, you can get these source files on Gumroad or on Patreon. Like I generally like to share all of the stuff that I do. So I'll probably do another one for the second sort of daily render thing that I might do. And I might do this more often because I actually had quite a lot of fun doing this. Like I've mostly been either doing client work and then in my free time doing the Unreal Engine stuff, which is mostly just technical stuff. And I just had a lot of fun just doing this more artistic thing just very quickly. So I might do some more of these. In the meantime, if you like this video, leave this a thumbs up. Subscribe if you want to see more of these of this stuff that I do. Again, I'm also going to be starting to uploading Unreal videos pretty soon with Houdini engine integration and stuff like that. Planning to do a devlog on the game that I'm making, even though it's still very early and there's still so much to do there. I thought that might be something interesting to sort of learn Unreal alongside me, I guess. While like I'm just going to discuss all of the things I've learned, and so I'm planning to do some videos for that. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hopefully this was educational. You can download this on Patreon or Gumroad. Link in the description. And that was it. Talk to you in the next one. Peace.